Hello, welcome back to story time. I'm gonna wear a quilt for a couple minutes here. What do you think about that? Let's do our opening song and then we'll talk some more about quilts. Make the sign for hello, make the sign for friends. Hello, friends. Hello, friends. Hello, friends. It's time to read a book or two or three, right? I thought it would be fun to read some books about quilts because there are some good ones, and I wanted to explain about the Storytime quilt that many of you have seen and many of you have sat on. And I want to tell you that quilt was made by my mother-in-law, and so was this one, and so was the one that these pictures are sitting on. And here is a picture of her this week. She's 90 years old and she's still making quilts. Look at that. And this quilt right here is a quilt with pictures in it from their wedding and from their 50th wedding anniversary, I think it was made for. And then here are some quilts that Miss Sue has made. So quilts can be a source of comfort, right? And they can be decorations like this one, and they can be practical. We can use them to stay warm or to sit on. Quilts can tell a story. So let's read and learn about some quilts that tell a story, and then I will share a few more pictures of my friends who like to quilt. So this book is it's called The Keeping Quilt. It's by Patricia, and she is a well-known Michigan author, right? And this book actually had its 25th anniversary, so she wrote this more than 25 years ago. I forget when the 25th anniversary was, but a year or two ago, I think. And this book is called The Keeping Quilt. Patricia says, when my great-grandma Anna came to America, she wore the same thick overcoat and big boots that she had worn for farm work. So she worked on a farm where she was originally from. But her family weren't dirt farmers anymore. In New York City, her father's work was hauling things on a wagon, and the rest of the family made artificial flowers all day. Everyone was in a hurry, and it was so crowded. Not like back home Russia, but all the same, it was their home, and most of their neighbors were just like them. Can you see the pictures? Maybe that's her grandma Anna, great-grandma Anna. When Anna went to school, English sounded to her like pebbles dropping into shallow water. Shh, shh, shh. In 6 months, she was speaking English. Her parents almost never learned, so she spoke English for them too. So here she is going to school. She moved here from Russia, and it took her a few months to learn English, but she did it. The only things she had left of back home, Russia, were her dress and babushka she liked to throw up into the air when she was dancing. That's all she had with her in terms of clothing. The rest she got here, I guess. And her dress was getting too small. After her mother had sewn her a new one, she took her old dress and babushka. Then, from a basket of old clothes, she took Uncle Vladimir's shirt, Aunt Havala's nightdress, and an apron of Aunt Natasha's. We will make a quilt to help us always remember home, Anna's mother said. It will be like having the family in back home Russia dance around us at night. So they're taking their clothes from Russia and they're going to make a quilt with them. Ooh, look at that. And so it was. Anna's mother invited all the neighborhood ladies. I don't know if it's Anna or Anna. Now I've mixed it up. I don't know. Either one. They cut out animals and flowers from the scraps of clothing. Anna kept the needles threaded and handed them to the ladies so that as they needed them, The border of the quilt was made of Anna's babushka. You can see the red border. And they're cutting out, I see a rooster and a horse maybe. On Friday nights, Anna's mother would say the prayers that started the Sabbath. The family ate challah and chicken soup. The quilt was the tablecloth. Anna grew up and fell in love with great-grandpa Sasha. To show he wanted to be her husband, he gave Anna a gold coin, a dried flower, and a piece of rock salt, all tied up in a linen handkerchief. The gold was for wealth, the flower for love, and the salt so their lives would have flavor. She accepted the hanky, and they were engaged. The salt and the flower and the gold coin were symbols of other things. Under the wedding chuppah, Anna and Sasha promised each other love and understanding. After the wedding, the men and women celebrated separately. That's how the Jewish weddings were back when Patricia's great grandma and grandpa were living. When my grandma Carly was born, so they had a baby, there she is, Anna wrapped her daughter in the quilt to welcome her warmly into the world. Carly was given a gift of gold, flour, salt, and bread. Gold so she would never know poverty, a flower so she would always know love, salt so her life would always have flavor, and bread so that she would never know hunger. Carly learned to keep the Sabbath and to cook and clean and do washing. Married you'll be, Anna told Carly. There they are, washing the quilt and hanging it on the line. And again, the quilt became a wedding chuppah, this time for Carly's wedding to Grandpa George. Men and women celebrated together, but they still did not dance together. In Carly's wedding bouquet were a gold coin, bread, and salt. Carly and George moved to a farm in Michigan, and great-grandma Anna came to live with them. The quilt once again wrapped a new little girl, Mary Ellen. So the quilt has gone 3 generations, right? From great-grandma to grandma to now, I bet that's Patricia's mother, maybe. Oh, goodness. Mary Ellen called Anna Lady Grandma. She had grown very old and was sick a lot of the time. The quilt kept her legs warm. On Anna's 98th birthday, the cake was a kulich, a rich cake with raisins and candied fruit in it. I'm not sure if I said that right, but oh, there she's very, very old. When great-grandma Anna died, prayers were said to lift her soul to heaven. My mother, Mary Ellen, was now all grown up. When Mary Ellen left home, she took the quilt with her. She's going away maybe to college or to get a job. When she became a bride, the quilt became her chuppah. For the first time, friends who were not Jews came to the wedding. My mother wore a suit. There she is. But in her bouquet were gold, bread, and salt. The quilt welcomed me, Patricia. Not me, but the author. Me, Patricia, into the world. There she is. And it was the tablecloth for my first birthday party. At night, I would trace my fingers around the edges of each animal on the quilt before I went to sleep. I told my mother stories about the animals on the quilt. She told me whose sleeve had made the horse, whose apron had made the chicken, whose dress had made the flowers, and whose babushka went around the edge of the quilt. They used the quilt to tell stories, didn't they? The quilt was a pretend cape when I was in the bull ring, or sometimes a tent in the steaming Amazon jungle. You can use a quilt to do imaginary play, right? At my wedding, men and women danced together, so times changed. In my bouquet were gold and bread and salt and a sprinkle of wine, so I would always know laughter. So there she is, the author Patricia getting married. Under the quilt. Oh, many years ago, I held Tracy Denise in the quilt for the first time. And then she had a daughter. And 3 years later, my mother held Stephen John in the quilt for the first time. She had a daughter and a son. We were all so proud of Tracy's new baby brother. Just like their mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother before them, they too used the quilt to celebrate birthdays and make superhero capes. Woohoo! As the years passed and Tracy and Stephen were growing up, their grandmother took pleasure at every family gathering to tell the story of the quilt. We all knew whose clothes made each flower and animal. My mother was lucky enough to show the wonder of this quilt to my brother's grandchildren, her great-grandchildren. Many, many generations got to see that quilt. When my mother died, prayers were said to lift her soul to heaven. Tracy and Stephen were now all grown up and getting ready to start their own lives. Now, as my children grow, this quilt has become a part of their hearts. Here's the author, Patricia, and her children, and the quilt. I decided to share its story with children everywhere, so I wrote a book to take with me on school visits for students to learn all about my family and traditions. Maybe some of your parents might have seen Patricia at a school visit with her quilt. In time, my son promised his life to his bride under this quilt. I gave them both bread so they would never know hunger, salt so that their lives would always have flavor, flowers so that they would know love, and finally a coin so that they would never be poor of spirit. There's her son getting married. And when my daughter stood under this quilt to promise her heart to her partner, she too received bread, salt, flowers, and a coin. There's her daughter and partner. And here's Patricia. As the years passed, the Keeping Quilt became fragile. Without my knowing, my son and daughter took digital photos of the quilt and sent them to my sister-in-law and her quilting guild. Oh, so after so many years, the fabric started wearing out, right? And so her son and daughter took pictures and sent them to a quilter. The photos helped them make an exact pattern of the original. They even researched online to find the right fabrics to recreate the quilt. One heart from the original quilt was removed and added to the replica. They talked about their own families and traditions as they sewed. So some quilters replaced the quilt that was wearing out with a new one exactly like it. My children presented the new quilt to me as a complete surprise on my birthday. Then I made a very hard decision. With a bittersweet heart, I let the original, the old one, the original Keeping Quilt leave my care to be on loan to the Mazza Museum at the University of Findlay in Findlay, Ohio. The Mazza Museum it's a museum of children's books and book art. Ooh, and here are people getting to see the quilt at the museum. It warms my heart to know that so many people will see the Keeping Quilt on display. Hopefully it will stir the beauty of memory and the richness of family in their souls, and they will take these feelings away with them. They will create legacies of their own. Now I take the new quilt to visit schools. Many hopeful brides and grooms have stood under it on their wedding day. It has covered many a table for special banquets. Children have run around using it as a cape in the backyard. It has covered the coffins of those in our family whom we have loved and mourned. But best of all, this quilt has wrapped the most precious gift of all, new lives. Isn't that a neat story about a quilt? Going for lots and lots of years. And a few weeks ago, my husband and I went to the Mazza Museum and we saw the original Keeping Quilt. This isn't a great picture of it, but here, can you see that? Here's the quilt that Patricia Polacco's great-grandma Anna made. And it is on display at the museum. Yeah. Can you see the horse? And somewhere there's, well, it's a little hard to tell what some of those things are, but I can see animals and plants. Look at that. Pretty cool. Someday, if you go to the University of Findlay to the Mazza Museum, you can see the Keeping Quilt there. Oh, I wanted to show you another cool quilt. See, this one is my friend Miss Bev and her friend Miss Gail. They're both quilters. And this quilt is it's called a Temperature Quilt. There's one square for every day of 2020 of last year. So you can tell the blue stands for the colder days, and these are the warmer days, and then the in between, and then it starts getting colder again, and you can tell the temperature. I'm not sure what all the color circles stand for, but the temperature of every day in 2020. Isn't that a beautiful quilt that my friends Bev and Gail are showing you? Yeah. And then the quilting group at my church makes somewhere around 50 quilts a year to give away. So here's a picture of Miss Cheryl working on a quilt that they give to people who need extra warmth. Yeah, so many cool quilts in the world. Let's read another quilt story. And this is called The Arabic Quilt, an Immigrant Story. And this is by Aya Khalil, and it's illustrated by Anat Samirzian. I had to practice that, and I probably still messed it up a little bit. The Arabic Quilt, an Immigrant Story. So here is another quilt that has a story associated with it. Not all quilts do. Well, maybe most quilts do. I don't know. Okay. Kanzi, Habibti, you're going to be late to the first day of school, Mama calls. I'm coming, Mama. Kanzi stuffs her notebook into her backpack and quickly, but carefully, folds her quilt, the special one Tieta made in Egypt. So this is another story about someone who has moved to the United States, I believe, from Egypt, from a country on the other side of the world. Breakfast is delicious. Egyptian fava beans, homemade French toast, and watermelon with feta cheese and mint. Zakaria has watermelon juice dripping down his chin. He looks happy. I packed your favorite lunch for you, a kofta sandwich, Baba exclaims. There's the family eating breakfast before her first day of school in her new school. Shukran, Baba, Kanzi says, but secretly she wishes her Baba would pack her a peanut butter and jelly sandwich instead. Shukran means thank you. Her family has just moved to this town and she doesn't know anyone. She doesn't want to be different. It can be hard to be different sometimes. In the car, Mama sings along with the songs on the Arabic radio channel. When they pull up to the school, Kanzi turns down the radio volume. Mama gives her a confused look. Good luck today, Mama says. Bahabek, I love you too, Kanzi responds. This says Forest View Elementary. It says, welcome, 3rd grade. In class, Mrs. Haugen asks all the students to share 3 facts about themselves. When it is Kanzi's turn, she says bravely, I am Egyptian American. I love to swim. I love to write poetry. Then she sits, looking down at her desk. At lunchtime, Kanzi is surprised when Mama walks through the door. Habibti, you forgot your lunchbox. Habibti? Like the Hobbit? Isn't your name Kanzi? Molly snickers. Her classmates laugh with her as they walk to the cafeteria. Mrs. Haugen sees tears rolling down Kanzi's cheeks. What's wrong? She asks. Molly made fun of what my mama said, Kanzi says. Oh, Kanzi, being bilingual, that means you can speak 2 languages. Being bilingual is beautiful, says Mrs. Haugen. Don't let anyone make you feel ashamed. You are special. It's really wonderful to be able to speak more than 1 language. That night, as Mama puts leftover sherbet odds in Kanzi's lunchbox, Kanzi gently pats Mama's back. Can you please pack me a turkey sandwich instead? Before bed, Kanzi writes a poem as she hugs her quilt, which smells like Tieta's home. She's feeling comfort from the quilt. The next day, Molly says, Mrs. Haugen says I hurt your feelings. I'm sorry I laughed at your mom's language. It sounded funny. It may sound funny to you, but that is only because you don't speak Arabic, Kanzi says. She feels a lump forming in her throat. My parents say that learning different languages makes a person smarter and kinder, she blurts out. Okay, whatever, Molly says, skipping away. Mrs. Haugen calls Kanzi to her desk after lunch. I found this notebook on the floor, and it was open to a lovely poem, she says. I was describing my Tieta's quilt, Kanzi says. When I visited her in Egypt, she gave it to me. My Tieta only speaks Arabic. Mrs. Haugen smiles. That is special. I would love to see your quilt. Can I bring it to school? Kanzi asks. Sure, bring it tomorrow, Mrs. Haugen says. The next day, Kanzi unfolds her quilt in front of the class. Her heart is pounding. Oh, she's nervous. This is my quilt that my Tieta in Egypt made, she says. That's cool. I want to make a quilt like that, Deshawn says. Maybe we can all make one for our classroom, Claire shouts. Mrs. Haugen nods and smiles. On Friday, Mrs. Haugen makes an announcement. I have an exciting project for us all to work on. Kanzi's mom is here to help us make a quilt of all of your names in Arabic. As Mama steps forward, Kanzi thinks how beautiful she looks. Shukran for welcoming me here, Mama says. Kanzi and I will write down your names in Arabic, and you will copy your name on your own quilt piece. What a cool idea. Molly is not enthusiastic about the project. Who cares about Arabic? We live in America. My mom says we should only speak English. In response, Mrs. Haugen starts writing words on the board. Algebra, coffee, lemon, sugar. Does anyone know what these words have in common? She asks. They come from Arabic words, Kanzi whispers. Mrs. Haugen nods. Learning other languages besides the one we grew up with helps make the world a friendlier place. We can speak non-English languages and still be American. I wonder what my name looks like in Arabic, Brianna says. Kanzi and Mama write down everyone's names. Neat! Shukran, Amina exclaims. Everyone copies their Arabic names onto sheets of colored paper. Then they decorate their papers with glitter and jewels and place them on the table for the glue to dry. On Monday morning, you will see a beautiful class quilt hanging in the hall, Mrs. Haugen tells them. Kanzi is nervous when the bell rings on Monday morning and the kids file into school. What if the quilt didn't turn out nicely? The quilt hangs on the bulletin board outside Mrs. Haugen's classroom. The colorful papers with their Arabic names have been cut into different shapes and sizes, and all the pieces are stapled together. Kanzi stands in awe, reading names in Arabic. Claire, Leah, Molly, Ivy, Jack, Lucas, Brianna, Chang, Deshawn, Sam, Angela, Lily, Amina. Teachers and older students stop to look at the names, trying to figure out whose name is whose. Wow, look at those beautiful letters. They're like drawings, they say. Can you see these, the names written in Arabic? That's another language. That was a really cool project, Kanzi. Shukran, Kanzi's classmates tell her. I'm sorry I made fun of you, says Molly. I didn't realize how important a different language is. Can you write my mom's name in Arabic? I want to give it to her as a gift. Okay, Kanzi says. Do you want to go swimming soon? I'd love to, Kanzi nods as Molly hugs her. Leaving class a week later, Kanzi stops to look at the Arabic quilt one last time. Right across from it, she is surprised to see another collage of names in a language she does not recognize. Those are my classmates' names in Japanese, Kura says. Our teacher was inspired by your classroom's idea, and she asked me to help write everyone's name in Japanese. Aren't languages a beautiful thing? They can truly unite us. Kanzi smiles in agreement. In her room that night, Kanzi holds Tieta's quilt tightly as she writes a poem for her parents. Shukran, Mama and Baba, for always encouraging me to be proud of speaking a different language and speaking it out loud. Languages can unite us together like a quilt. So I will always speak my languages without guilt. I will never be ashamed to speak in this language that is so unique. Bahabek, Mama, Bahabek, Bapa. 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 I can't talk. There we go. Isn't that nice? A story of a quilt that came to the U.S. from Egypt. So we've had one come from Russia and one come from Egypt. And here, I'll share another quilt picture with you with my friend Miss Debbie and Miss Kathy holding it over here. Isn't that a beautiful one? Quilters are artists, right? And here's the one that what does that look like to you? That's another one that my mother-in-law made a long time ago. Yeah, it looks like the flag of America, doesn't it? And there she is. Let's do zoom zoom and maybe one more story. Zoom, 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 we're going to the moon. Zoom, 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 we're going to the moon. If you want to take a trip, climb aboard my rocket ship. Zoom, 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 we're going to the moon. Count down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Blast off! It's a little hard to keep my quilt on here. Let's do another quick story. I think this one isn't as long. It's called The Quilt Story by Tony Johnston and Tommy Paula. And it's about another quilt. Let's see here. A little girl's mother made the quilt to keep her warm when the snow came down long ago. She stitched the quilt by a yellow flame, humming all the time. She stitched the tails of falling stars, and she stitched the name Abigail. Abigail loved the quilt. She wrapped it around her in the quiet dark and watched the winter skies. Sometimes she saw a falling star. Sometimes Abigail played in the woods near her home. She had tea, her dolls had tea, and the quilt had tea all over it. Looks like it spilled. Sometimes she pretended the quilt was a gown. She wore it to town on her horse, clop, 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 and it tore. So her mother stitched it up once more. There's Abigail, having fun with her quilt. Oh, she's getting older. Sometimes she played hide and seek with her sisters. Oh, those are her sisters. She laughed and cried, "Don't peek," and hid under the quilt, and everyone found her. Sometimes Abigail was sick. She sneezed and sneezed, then she slept under the quilt, and she felt better. One day, Abigail's family moved away across wide rivers and over a rock-hard trail. There they go. They're moving across the country in a covered wagon. The quilt went to, here it is, not stuffed in trunks with the blankets and clothes. It kept the little girls warm from the wild winds, warm from the rain, warm from the sparkling nights. So this was about a pioneer family, right? Back in the early days of our country. They built a new house in the woods. Abigail's father built it with his hatchet, chop, chop, chop. He built her a new bed, chip, chip, chip. There it is. He made her a new horse, too. He worked until curly shavings covered the floor, and everyone sneezed and said, "Welcome home," and was glad. And Abigail felt sad. New house, new horse, new bed. Everything smelled of fresh chops and chips. Everything but the quilt. So her mother rocked her as mothers do, then tucked her in, and Abigail felt at home again under the quilt. A comfortable quilt can help us feel at home even when we're in new places. One day when the quilt was very old and very loved, Abigail folded it carefully and put it in the attic. So she got older and she put it away up in the attic. Everyone forgot it was there. A gray mouse came and loved the quilt. Her babies were born on top of it. They grew fat and gray in the warm stuffing. When they got hungry, they ate a falling star. A raccoon came and loved the quilt. She dug a hole in the corner with her black paws and hid an apple in there. A cat came and loved the quilt, a patchwork cat. Looks like a quilt. It rolled on the stars and stuffing spilled out like snow. Then the cat curled up in the snow and purred. "Kitty, kitty," called a little girl. She found her cat, and she found the quilt splashed with patterns of sun. The little girl wrapped the quilt around her, and she loved it too. Maybe she's Abigail's child. I wonder, because I think Abigail might be all grown up by now. "Can you make it like new?" she asked her mother. So her mother patched the holes. She pushed fresh stuffing in. She stitched long tails on the stars to swish across the quilt again. One day, the little girl's family moved away. Oh, they moved again across miles and miles of pavement and snaking gray highways. They found a new house, freshly cleaned, freshly waxed, freshly painted white. They unpacked and unpacked all night, and everyone sneezed on cardboard dust and said, "Welcome home," and was glad. But the little girl felt sad. Everything smelled of white paint and boxes. Everything but the quilt. And that's another story about two generations enjoying and receiving comfort from a quilt, right? Well, thanks for joining me for story time about quilts. I hope maybe you have a quilt or a blanket or something that you like to play with and more that keeps you comfortable and you can play superhero with or whatever you want to do. And I hope you are able to come and join me someday at story time when the time is right. And whenever it's time to buy books, I hope you buy them from BookBug or an independent bookstore if you live somewhere else. Let's sing our goodbye song and have a wonderful week. Goodbye, friends. Goodbye, friends. Goodbye, friends. It's time to say goodbye. Take care.